Welcome back. Multiple times. Good to see you over and over again, and grateful to be back with you. In the Gospel of John, we'll jump right in because we kind of have a rough start here, but we are in the 14th chapter. Maybe a little preface before we start reading here. This is among the best known sections probably in John. There are things that people would know from the Gospel of John, but I think the passage that we're looking at today would be one of those that people would claim as a beloved passage, a favorite passage. Part of that may be that it is relatively common in funeral services. We can talk about that more on the other side of reading it, but that makes it probably a passage that a lot of people have heard. Let me jump in and read a couple of verses, and then we'll talk our way through it. So this is Jesus, chapter 14. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go there to prepare a place for you? Let's just go ahead and stop there, Michael, because I think there's enough for us to talk about. This opening line here, do not let your hearts be troubled, believe in God and believe also in me. Again, I think this is a well-known verse. I think this is a beloved verse. It's a verse of comfort. Very few of us get through our experience in life without our hearts being troubled at some point. And so the idea of Jesus speaking to that discomfort, speaking to our pain and our struggle, and speaking past it, in words that are meant to heal and to salve wounds. I think this is just one of those phrases, Michael. I think most people, if they have much experience at all with Bible, they know this verse is there. They may not know where it is. I mean, they may not be able to say, oh, that's John 14:1. But I often, and I know you have the same experience, meet with families, and this is one of the verses that kind of comes up. And so I think we don't want to just rush past this, because I think this is a very important moment, not only in the story as Jesus is literally saying these words to the disciples, but for the way that disciples after that have always heard and treasured these words. I think this is a really wonderful verse.
There's a few parts of this I think that are really remarkable, and I think it is wise to slow down. The first is, remember that in John, Jesus has had some really sharp language, especially for the Jewish leaders, and there's a way in which you could read this book. I mean, Jesus starts off his ministry going in and throwing over tables and using a whip in a place where the temple is being misused. Jesus has a really strong presence in this book. And I think one of the amazing parts of this story is the way that John also portrays Jesus as being a compassionate, empathetic, a deeply affected human. And goes back to that idea of Jesus even weeping at the presence and in the midst of the loss of a friend and the grieving of loved ones. And so here, I think that there is this beautiful connective piece happening that still resonates with us today. Yes, it's universal that humanity continues to this day to have troubled hearts. The water is restless. And yet also this thing that Jesus promises then and now, that there's something beyond the pale that we can see. And I also want to point out, I have verse 37 and 38 listed up here. I just wanted to provide context because I think it's really helpful here that Jesus says, don't let your heart be troubled, immediately after making an unbelievably troubling phrase to Peter, his disciple, to say that you are going to deny me 3 times before the morning rolls around. And yet it's following that Jesus is moving into this, do not let your hearts be troubled. I think, Clint, that's meaningful. I think that there's an acceptance, a naming of the fact that Jesus is both aware of our weaknesses. In this case, he was speaking directly to the rock, that leader of the church, but he's not just aware of them, he's compassionate. Jesus knows our fallenness, and Jesus has more than enough love to bridge the gap. I think that's the beauty of the way that John is telling this story, that it combines truth with grace. And I think that that is a intrinsic part of who Jesus, the Son of God, is. He comes portraying something that is more real than what we could imagine. And when he shines light on our falseness, there's still light there. There's still hope there. There's still the promise that there's a place that's being prepared. There's still direction even in broken hearts. And I think that there's something deeply pastoral about the text, Clint, which is intended, of course, but it still resonates with us today. And I think that's why it's so well known.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting here that the text suggests that the remedy for our hearts being troubled is belief. And John very much likes to set these things apart from one another. Faith and doubt, trust and uncertainty. And here we have that idea that when our hearts are troubled, the way through that is to put our faith, increase our faith, or lean on our faith in God and also in me. And so I'm not sure that this is a teaching text per se. As you say, I think it probably leans more heavily into the idea of pastoral care and compassion. But there is a sense here that Jesus is laying out a pathway for us. Do not let your hearts be troubled by believing in God and believing also in me. And it is our faith that serves to protect our heart at some level from the troubles that it might encounter. And then we move on to this next verse. In my Father's house there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go and prepare a place for you? And we'll just push on here. And if I go prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, that where I am, there you will also be. And this is one of those verses where I think the simple reading is best. People have been fascinated by this verse for what it might be saying. There's another one coming up. It just this idea that Jesus is saying there might be many rooms, and people have speculated, what if that means this group is over here, or what if that means I think a better approach is to say, what's the simple explanation here? And the simple explanation is that the house of God has enough room for everyone. There's many rooms in it. It's a big place. There is room for you, for all believers. There is room for everyone. And if that weren't the case, I wouldn't have told you that it is the case. So I'm going to prepare a place for you, and I'll come again so that you'll be there with me. And I think there's just a sense in Michael in which this beautiful, sort of the way it's written, has led to moments where this beautiful and I think rather simple point has gotten blurred by speculating, which is fun to do, but I think rarely helps us get to the actual heart of the text.
Yeah, I may be overstretching the point here, Clint, but while it may be fun to do, I think one should make an argument that it needs to be actively resisted. Because I think when we give in to our inherent creaturely desire to inquire as to the exact detail of what the afterlife is going to be, a theme which, by the way, I think we could argue the scriptures in whole push against at pretty much every turn. I think when we allow our imaginations to push us ahead towards, well, are they mahogany rooms, or are they what kind of cultural decoration? When we allow ourselves to go down that road, I think we're actually, it's not just a harmless sort of meandering. I actually think it does some damage to our ability to understand what Jesus is saying here. Because, and I want to look at this really closely together, what he's talking about is leaving. right? What he's saying is, I'm going to be going away. And any human who has had someone deeply meaningful, someone who we love, leave us in any capacity, right? Whether that just be that they're going on an extended trip, or whether that be that we have that horrible moment where a relationship has a schism and then we lose that person, or death itself. The loss of a person is such a huge moment in our life. It's so painful. It drives deeply within us. And here Jesus is saying, I am going to go. And that's inherently a painful promise, prediction for these disciples. But yet, we should not miss it is for a purpose. What's the purpose? Because God's grace and provision is expansive. There are many rooms. It is a large place. It is not just for the 12, it is for a multitude beyond who Jesus is speaking to in that room that night. Make no mistake, friends, John is telling this gospel so that you too might believe. There's room for you. That this is it written into this text. It is just this beautiful combination of both the recognition of loss, but the possibility of God's providence and power, of what Jesus is going to make possible with this hard thing that lies ahead. And Clint, I think when we get really tempted by looking at texts like this and trying to imagine the future, what we're missing is that beautiful combination of what Jesus is saying is true combined with what is even more true. And I think that we should not miss that.
Yeah, I agree 100%, Michael. And I think the danger of reading something like this and trying to be, semi-literal with it, as if Jesus is describing an actual house and teaching a lesson about who gets to be in each room, you miss the point, right? Because again, this is relatively straightforward if you stick with the text. Jesus is talking to the believers, the disciples. He's saying you have hard times ahead. Lean on your faith. Put your faith in me, because when I'm not with you, I'm going to prepare the place for you, and that place has a place for you. Now, that's a beautiful message to them, and it remains a beautiful message for everyone who comes after and reads it. I'm coming to take you to myself, because the kingdom of God, the home of God, the house of God, has room in it for each of you. And I'm coming back to take you to myself and bring you with myself to be in it. And um, I- that says enough. We don't need to add layers and speculation. That is a beautiful proclamation of the work of Jesus Christ and the grace of God and the expansiveness of God's grace. And I just, we do not need to add speculation on it. There's no reason for it.
Well, and this is the it's not really a danger, it's the wrong way to say it. I think when we look at a text like this and we put it inside a worship context that we're comfortable with, similar to like 1 Corinthians 13, where we often hear that at a wedding, a text can begin to mean something. And if you've heard this text a lot at a funeral, you might begin to associate with that context. I just think it's really important to point out that this is flowing out of Peter's question, why can I not follow you now? And make no mistake about it, look to where we are now in verse 4, and you know the way to the place where I'm going. And we'll have more conversation once we talk about Thomas and his response here. But make no mistake about it, there's this story, this teaching is about direction. It's about following, it's about the path, it's about the way forward. And Jesus is saying, there's a house there, right? Where I'm going, the path that I'm taking, you're going to know the way. You're going to be on the path. You're going to find it in the end. And yet, that's amidst the grief. That's amidst the valleys. That's with the real struggles and the real doubts. And the disciples are in it. They're human. They have real struggles with their faith. When Jesus says to them here at the beginning of this text in verse 1, believe in God and believe in me, have faith in God, have faith in me. When Jesus is saying that, he's not saying that just to say, he's saying it because he knows that needs to be heard. And I think that's the amazing gift of a text like this is that Jesus is both empowering the disciples by saying, don't worry, don't let it keep you up at night. You will be one of those who will find the way to the house. On the other hand, Jesus knows they can't do it by themselves. He knows that there's real limitations. And the truth that you and I know is that Jesus is the answer for those limitations, that Jesus is doing for these disciples what is necessary so that they will follow the way. And that's the real amazing gift of a text like this, is that Jesus both shows the weakness of the humanity of those that are following him, while simultaneously being the one who makes the end for those people. And that's who Jesus is. That's who the Son of God is in the Gospel of John. And I think it's a beautiful way of portraying it.
It's wonderful, and it's great news for all of us that there is enough room in the kingdom. There is a spot for each of us as we lean into our belief and follow Christ. We're going to see where that takes Jesus and what it says to us tomorrow. Kind of a short session today as we knock the dust off after being gone for a week or so, but hope you can join us tomorrow. This culminates in another beautiful and I think well-known verse, and we'd love to share it with you if you can join us.
If you made it this far, give this video a like. Helps others find it in their own study of the Bible. And friends, that makes a difference because today we celebrate having broke 1,300 people on YouTube. So for all those people who have joined us, we're grateful that you've been along for the journey. Do subscribe so you can help us as we continue along, and we will see you all tomorrow.
Thanks for listening.